Welcome to today's webinar on how to comply with DISA STIGs for containers by using Anchore. I want to, before we get started, do a little bit of housekeeping with everybody. So let's go ahead and advance to our next slide there. There we go. Oh, moving around a little bit. So everybody, as you probably realized, your participant lines are muted, but you can ask questions. There is a questions panel on the GoToWebinar control panel, and you can feel free to add questions at any point during the webinar, and then we'll answer those when we get to the end of the webinar. But feel free to put them in as you think of them. Everybody is going to receive a follow-up email within the next 24 hours that will include a link to the recording. If in addition to that, you would like to have the actual slides, feel free to post a question and we'll try to make sure you get that as well. And then at the end of the webinar, once we finish, as you leave, it'll ask for a very quick survey. There's just like 3 short questions. So if you could take that survey, that's great. It helps provide us with feedback for future webinars. All right, let's move on to just give you a little bit of quick background on Anchore. So many of you may already know about Anchore, but some of you may not. So Anchore is focused on helping organizations to secure their cloud-native software supply chain. So as many of you have probably seen in the news with a lot of the cybersecurity attacks going on, people are starting to pay more and more attention to ensuring that the software supply chain is secure, both what they're developing in-house, but as they bring software in as well. And so Anchore does that by embedding continuous security and compliance checks at each step of the software development process, which then makes it faster and easier to remediate those issues that arise. So that's the quick commercial on Anchore. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So agenda today, we're going to be talking about DISA STIGs, why they're important in general, but also what happens when you need to apply STIGs to containerized applications, which are becoming obviously more and more common as people move to that as the primary delivery method. And then really how to go about bringing STIG checking into that existing security process that you might have. And we'll be finishing up with a demo, so you'll get to see that in action using Anchore. And let's go on to our next slide. So we're going to do a few polling questions while we're waiting for everybody to join. Gives you a chance to get to know each other, us to get a chance to know you. So the first polling question that we have is just about the adoption of containers in your organization. How much are you adopting containers? So you can go ahead and click the option that is most relevant to you, whether you're not using containers or just getting started, some adoption, significant adoption, or whether you maybe are very heavily focused on containers with most of your apps. So I'll give you guys a few more seconds here so you can pick the option that responds best to you. And we're going to go ahead and close the polling. And I'm going to share the results with you. So about 40% of you are in the beginning stages, just getting started, 40% a little further along, and then the rest are in more advanced stages of container adoption. All right, thank you for that. So let's go on to a second polling question about STIGs. Which is whether you are using STIGs specifically for containerized applications. So you might be using it for other types of apps, but select one of the following, whether yes, you are doing that, not yet, but you maybe need to, you have a requirement to, no need to, don't have apps that are containerized or don't care about STIGs, or you're not sure. So let's go ahead and give you a few more seconds to get your answers recorded. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So about a third of you are already needing to do it or doing it, and the rest of you are looking to figure out how you're going to do it probably, and then a few not sure, probably trying to figure out if it applies to you. All right, one final polling question before we get going. And this is, what are the challenges for using STIGs with containers? And this one, you can go ahead and pick more than one. And even if you're not sure, not doing it yet, maybe what are the challenges that you're concerned about? So go ahead and look at those options, whether you're not sure which STIGs apply, whether it's difficult to run, whether you're not trying to report on the results, concerned about remediation. So go ahead and select all of the options that are applicable to you. And then we'll go ahead and we'll close the poll and share the results. So a lot of you are not sure what STIGs apply, concerned about reporting on the results, and then the actual running of the STIGs and the remediation. All right, perfect, thanks for that. All right, so with that, that's the, oops. Sorry, it did the share the results. What happened there? Let's hide results. Looks like we're skipping ahead. Sorry guys, we're having a little technical difficulty. Hide results. All right. Brian, I can't quite get the polls to go away. Not sure if we can make that end. All right, we're trying to fix that problem. And let me maybe I'm going to just turn off sharing, change the presenter for a moment here. Hang on. Hayden, do you want to see if you can stop sharing your screen and then reshare it? Okay, I think we're good now. Perfect. Yeah. All right, so with that, I'm going to be introducing Hayden Smith, who's one of our DevSecOps engineers with a focus on the public sector here at Anchore. So Hayden, take it away.
Sweet. Hi, everyone. I'm Hayden. Just a quick background on myself. I've pretty much been in a lot of these people's shoes I expect on the phone, where you're developing a system for a government customer or program office out there. So I served as a DevOps and information security engineer for Booz Allen for about 5 years. So kind of, spread all across the public sector over there, but primarily focused on the Air Force and DoD. So happy to kind of talk to you today about STIGs. It's something I'm very intimately familiar with. So hopefully we can answer some questions and show you how we can make this process a little bit easier for all the key stakeholders involved. Okay, so just to kind of level set with everyone on the context of what we're working with here in the security context of a cloud native environment, right? This is a story I think a lot of people have heard. If you've heard about Anchore, is we're here to, and Kim kind of mentioned it when we opened up, which is we're here to help you secure your cloud native software supply chain. Everything from sourcing and developing, from building to testing to deploy and run. And you could see why, right, on this diagram, because you could see all the different kinds of attacks that could come in and potentially impact what you're delivering at the end of the day from a software perspective. Specifically as it pertains to Anchore, right, and how it pertains to a cloud native landscape is really how you're packaging software in containers and how you're securing those containers, upon delivery. And an important thing to focus on as we talk about, with Anchore is, traditionally we've been focused on that left side, right? So remediating a lot of things that come in during sourcing, developing, and building software as it pertains to containers. Today, you're actually going to see a lot about what Anchore is doing from the running perspective, right? So that runtime context, what's going on in my cluster, what images are running in my cluster, how do I analyze an image that's running in my cluster and gain insight into that. And that's really important as we talk about, identifying issues in production images, which you see there on the far right. So, where we have our roots and where we have a very, very mature, product is really in that sourcing, developing, and building stage, where we're helping, people all across the DoD and people all across the federal agencies to help secure their containers by, baking it in and automating it into that CI/CD process. But now we're actually talking about expanding a little bit further, right? So dipping our toes into that runtime context to provide insight for our customers, which is very, very valuable, right? So it really rounds out how we're doing security and how we're going to be, maintaining visibility of what's running in my clusters, what vulnerabilities do I have in my clusters, and then eventually, right, in the context of STIGs, it's how can I identify targets to run STIGs against, right? So it's hard to, decide what am I going to STIG, and why am I running, a selected STIG. You have to be able to know what's running in your environment and what software that is in order to select the right STIG and then run it, and then be able to store that information in a secure way, right? And export it if you need for compliance purposes. Okay, so just to get into it, why STIGs are important. So security stands for Security Technical Implementation Guide. Typically, these are very long documents, right? Anyone that's ever worked in the cybersecurity space within the federal or public sector kind of context knows this. And they exist for a good purpose, right? So they're there to do a lot of basic checks that really should be, installed or configured on a host. So that's what's important here, is that we know they're there for a good purpose. The problem is, when you start talking about how this exists in a kind of DevOps or DevSecOps framework, is really how does a STIG impact actually all the security stakeholders that are at the table, and how can we remediate that, right? So what we've seen is that it's causing some problems in terms of how exactly do we do this in terms of containerized technology, right? So we'll address that on the next few slides. But also what's important to notice, STIGs do have different severity ratings, right? So when you use a tool like STIG Viewer and you import, a result that we will gather here today during the demo, you could see and categorize those on Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3 findings as defined by DISA. This is actually a screenshot from the RHEL 8 STIG, which is, by definition what they mean, right? So Cat 1 is any vulnerability that, the exploitation of which will directly and immediately result in a loss of, that CIA triad. So going back to the basics of InfoSec right there. Cat 2, which is any vulnerability, has the potential to result in loss of CIA. And then Cat 3, which is any vulnerability, the existence of which degrades the measures to protect against. So what's important to kind of think about there is, based on the data and sensitivity level of your system, pretty much for all systems in the federal space, like if you have a Cat 1 finding, that should probably get remediated, right? That's what we used to call, those no-fly controls, right? You're not going to get off the ground if you have those Cat 1 findings. So we need to be able to at least, have the ability to go out there and identify things like that and identify misconfigurations, so that way your teams know, what findings you have. I like to think about STIGs as really a tiered cake, right? So there's a STIG out there for a lot of different stuff. Anything from the basic application security STIG to Apache Tomcat to Docker. There's a lot of STIGs out there. So the way STIGs basically work, right, is you have that base OS, right? So you have to make sure that's hardened. So you have to apply and read through what I need to go configure. And the STIGs are actually really informational on, if this check is indeed missing, if I don't have this security check configured, this is the exact place you need to go look in order to configure this. So, in the context of how we used to apply this for virtual machines, a lot of times you could create Ansible scripts or something like that would go out and create a hardened and STIG like RHEL VM, and that would be pretty simple. I believe Red Hat even hosts like Ansible scripts now and GitHub that can help you do that if you're talking about just the base OS. But Continuing on, if you think about, what you could layer on top of that, right? So say you have like what we have on the left, which is a Apache Tomcat application server. So then you have that running on top, and then you have another, something else running on top. Then you have 3 or 4 different STIGs that you have to apply. So it can get quite tedious quite quickly. And on top of that, right, it makes it a little bit difficult to manage in terms of, okay, how am I going to return all of these results, and how do I possibly manage, hundreds of, or maybe thousands, depending on the size of your environment. How do I manage all these findings? And when you talk about a cloud native environment and applying it to containers, you could quickly see how this can sprawl. So kind of talked about the pain associated with it, right? They're complex to implement. The documents are extremely long. The profiles, if you go and look at those that you apply, they're actually really long. There's different configuration checks that may lead your development teams to have to go and apply, hundreds or thousands of configuration checks, again, depending on the size of your environment. And then that leads to like this back and forth, right? Which is, I'm a developer. I just hardened this container. I hardened this VM. And now I'm getting reports back from security and about all these checks, these STIGs maybe I'm missing, or these findings I have. Oh man, that could be frustrating. So it's important to have it, incorporated into a tool like that has a very flexible API like Anchore, which we'll see today, right? So we have a solution for this to kind of get everyone and all the security stakeholders on the same page that will help, really apply some of these STIG profiles to containerized applications. As I said before, many of these are designed natively for virtual machines, right? So there are some checks in there that don't apply for containers and will register as, not applicable, right? So, this is important to keep in mind. We're working through this with our federal, partners, as, creating STIG checks that are more applicable to containers, so we don't have to keep on reusing the virtual machine profiles. How OSCAP can help. So OSCAP is the Open Security Content Automation Protocol. It's a tool that you could use to go ahead and apply the SCAP framework. So you could go ahead and apply STIG checks to your environment and get results back. So it's an automated command line tool you could use. I've used it a ton, and what we do here at Anchore, relies on OSCAP quite a bit. But what we do is a little bit different in how we leverage the tool and make it a little bit more flexible for a DevOps environment. The problem with this, as I mentioned on the previous slide, is that typically when you're going through and applying these OSCAP, the OSCAP tool, it's not like in unison, right? So it's typically your development team, and they're trying to harden something before they ship it, which is a good best practice, right? That's something that Anchore personally is doing, with partners at the Space Force. Is really, we're trying to figure out, what of these STIG checks can we actually implement to the left? And then there's some STIG checks that, of course, you have to wait for the application to actually spin up and run in order to apply that STIG check. So we're actively researching and developing, solutions for that. But it's siloed from the rest of your security processes, right? So typically when you design this in an environment and in a pipeline, you have to separate out a step where it goes and installs OSCAP and pulls it down, or maybe you have to go build a virtual machine and install OSCAP. Our solution is actually, focused on incorporating it into our tool, so that way you have everything centralized, which we'll get into on the next few slides. STIGs require collaboration, so this is something that there's a slide I really like. When some of my biggest frustrations when I'd be building systems is really like, oh, we just spent a lot of time trying to make this a hardened image or a hardened virtual machine, and now we got all the way through and we deployed it, and then security comes back a month later with a bunch of findings because they did their monthly STIG review, right? That's not, we shouldn't be doing like one-off kind of monthly things, right? This should be a continuous approach to security. That's all about like what DevSecOps is really about. It's about, doubling down on security, not throwing it out the window. And the way we can help do that with Anchore is through offering, a flexible API that can help you bake this into pipelines and security workflows and things like that that can help keep everyone on the same page as it's required for STIG kind of collaboration. Because there's nothing more frustrating than having to go back and rework something. And that's not just specific to STIGs, right? That's part of our goal at Anchore to help remediate for developers, is really to find those solutions early, to implement the solutions early, so you don't have to worry about them when they're in production. So let's get into how Anchore can help with all this, right? That's why everyone tuned in. So again, focusing on kind of the running concepts of Anchore, right? So we have Kai, which is our Kubernetes automated inventory. This deploys as a pod that runs within your Kubernetes clusters. And what's cool about Kai is that you can actually deploy it within multiple clusters in different cloud environments, right? So as you'll see in the demo today, I have 3 or 4 that are linked up to my centralized deployment, and I can see all the images within that. And then from there, I can actually pull in, I could pull in images for analysis from my developer sandbox if I wanted to. But the important thing about Kai is that it provides the baseline, right? So it provides the inventory and visibility of where your clusters stand from a compliance perspective, but also what images are running in your cluster. So that way you have the proper knowledge and intelligence to go ahead and decide, okay, we have these applications running in my cluster, so we need to go in and STIG, this, and this, right? And then REM is what exists in the runtime context as well. So don't want to get into REM quite yet. This is kind of a screenshot. I'll show you in real time what this looks like, but you get the idea. It's your compliance on the left. Here are all your compliant clusters and images within those clusters. And then here are your vulnerabilities, across the cluster. And then you could dive in and see what images are in there and pull images in for analysis. So it's kind of step 1 is identification. What do we need to STIG? What's in my cluster that I can STIG? That's really solving the, why am I doing this? So introducing REM, right? Any REM fans out there? I thought I'd throw this in for you, but not this REM, right? So REM works to embed OSCAP into Anchore Federal. So REM stands for Remote Execution Manager. You can run it from your command line. It's really, really neat. So what it does is it embeds OSCAP and execs into the pod and container, and what it does is it installs OSCAP and runs the STIG check directly on the container, and then it does the automated cleanup for you, right? So it exports that result, so it can load the OSCAP profile, apply and run the OSCAP profile, and then it can go ahead and upload that result to your Anchor Enterprise deployment. And then from there, you can pull results down over the API, which is really nice. It also has an audit database. So say you're using this in an offline mode, pretty much, it's there for fault tolerance, right? So in case the Anchor Enterprise service is unavailable, it can upload it. You could still kind of store it locally and then upload when that service becomes available again. And then again, you could export this via XML or HTML over the API, which is really nice. So we'll see today how that kind of works, and kind of the steps you have to take to use Kai and REM together to really be successful. And one, identifying what applications I need to take a look at, what containers I need to take a look at, and then 2, how do I apply this STIG and how do I use REM exactly? So that's and we'll go through everything today. So buckle your seatbelt, because it's going to be really, really quick, and it's going to be fast moving. So hopefully everyone's ready. And what we tried to accomplish here with incorporating STIG checks when we were working with our federal stakeholders is really that we want to have that one-stop shop, right? Where it's, yes, you can get your complete software bill of materials. We've been doing that since 2016. You could get your complete list of vulnerabilities. Again, been doing that since 2016. Secrets and malicious code, all the traditional stuff that you have gotten with Anchore in the past, which is best of breed NIST 800 compliance, best in breed SBOM, composition, and then doing things like malware scanning and detecting malicious code, and then throwing in STIG checks. So you no longer, if you're baking out a pipeline, you don't have to go and export this to a third-party system, right? You don't have to go export this to S3 or anything. It could live in the Anchor enterprise deployment with the rest of, all your kind of information, vulnerability results as it pertains to your images. So that's really important, is that you no longer have to separate this out into a separate step, in a pipeline or in your security process. It's all under one roof with Anchor Federal. All right, so now we'll move into the demo. I will kind of exit screen sharing just a bit. Okay, so what you're seeing right here is really, the runtime kind of Kai component, right? And I'll kind of get into showing you how this is configured. So from the runtime context, we could see all of our different clusters right here on the left. So let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. So we could see the clusters that we are tracking. So again, it's designed to be multi-cloud, so you could, throw this agent or pod that runs within your clusters in any kind of cloud environment and have it report back to this centralized kind of management service, which we have in Anchor Enterprise and Anchor Federal. So you have all your clusters right here. I could go in here and look at, this developer sandbox, but I can also go in here, and for the sake of the demo, I've gone ahead and stood up a namespace that has my specific images that I want to take a look at in there, right? So I have all these test images from various flavors of different operating systems. And I can see here, okay, I have these images that are running in my cluster, but I haven't gone ahead and actually analyzed them. So one by one, you can actually submit these for analysis, which is very useful. So you no longer, right, have to kind of wait or bake this in, early on. If you have a developer that somehow got around the system and got around your admission controllers some way, somehow, and just deployed this into your cluster, but you need to go ahead and analyze it, that's what Anchore is really focused on here. So you could go ahead and pull that stuff in really quickly. So we'll go ahead and wait for that to kind of get through and that analyzing. While we wait, though, I'll kind of pop over into my other screen, and I'll show you just how easy that was to stand up. So I have a sample Kai values right here. So it deploys as a pod, like I said, just a kubectl apply-f, and then you would pass it a file similar to this. So what it's actually going to be looking for is really just like where do you want Kai to deploy, right? So what context or what cluster do you want Kai to deploy in? It can read from your local kube config file. And then you have to pass it these 2 lines right here, or 3 lines, sorry, which is, what's the Anchor Enterprise API that I need to hit to upload all this information to? And then you have to pass it credentials, of course, to go ahead and, have it upload all the findings too. So that's really important. So again, we'll kind of dive into how you would do REM as well, since we're already here in the terminal-ish VS Code. So what you do here for REM is similar, right? So REM, this is a REM config file, so you can actually, configure this with to run like locally wherever you want. So here it's very much the same. This is where you configure, if you want to leave OSCAP enabled on a node, or if you want kind of some automated cleanup. So typically what I do is I'll have this set so it installs OSCAP, applies the running, the STIG to the running container. And then once it's done and uploads to Anchor Enterprise, I'll go ahead and uninstall OSCAP just to keep things really clean. So without further ado, I think we'll go ahead and do that. Let's see. So, all right. Yes, here we go. So I'll bring this over. So this is the command, right, that you would run. So this is going ahead and taking I'm telling REM to exec into this specific container within this specific namespace. So this again reads from my kubeconfig file, so I'm already authenticated to my cluster. And what I could do, sorry, I'm going to turn off my video so you're not too distracted. What I could do here is then point it to anything I'm running in my cluster, right? So I'm going to point this at this rel 8 pod that we just kind of looked at with Kai and brought in for analysis. And then you can see here it's going to pass the specific OSCAP profile. And then it's going to pass that result on to Anchore Enterprise, which we'll see here. So we'll see it kind of run through, cue the elevator music. It's going to install OSCAP. And then we'll kind of bring up, while this is running, we'll bring up my other terminal. We'll kind of get ready and prep for pulling down, the results. So we'll see. Go back here. So this is actually, when you're talking about pulling the results down over the API, this is what you would get, right? So it's telling me this, I've run this multiple times before, but let me pull up the command one more time, which is, I'm telling it to hit this API. I'm telling it to go to runtime compliance and list all the kind of compliance findings. From here, what we'll do is we'll actually pull down this result, and then we could, look at that file, look at our findings, what we passed, what we failed, and we can pull back into the REM tool and see how it's going. So it's executing inside the container, which is good. Does take a little bit of time, but I don't want to manually do this, so I am okay with it. Let's see if we could take a look, see if the image is finished analyzing. Yeah, so kind of flip back while we wait for that to get finished. You can see my rel 8 image just finished a few seconds ago, so that took about a minute. Doing a live demo though, it felt like 15 minutes. So it went ahead and pulled all the vulnerabilities in for that rel 8 image. It applied, my Anchore CIS policy, which I have running right now. So again, you're getting all that best of breed stuff that you get with Anchore. And then we're going to layer on STIGs on top of everything that we have here. So, all the malware checking, that looks good. Vulnerabilities, we have a few we can work on. Policy and compliance, again, a few we can work on here. See, still executing in the container. Let's see, backup plan. Let me just back out. Sorry. All right, so you could see kind of how that worked, except it didn't go all the way. Let me try just doing a simple CentOS with a standard profile. That should work a little bit better. So it went ahead, it's going a little bit quicker. Perfect. So it went ahead and ran. Now you can see it's uploading that compliance report to Anchore. So we should be able to grab that down. And I went ahead and uninstalled OSCAP. Perfect. So now we can jump over here. Again, run this and go grab that report down for CentOS. So here it returns all those results. Go to the top. That's where we're at, I believe. Just grab this one. That'll work for me. And then we'll do result / and then the file ID. And then we'll save that in, we'll do CentOS stig.html. So we grab that down. Again, all over the API, that's the important part, is that you can use this in a very flexible way. And then you get results that pretty much look like this, right? And you could take these results and ingest them into a tool like Stig Viewer or however else you wanna view Stigs, and you'll be able to see this in a lot more pretty picture. I think the big idea here is actually automating a lot of this. So, keeping it all under one roof, throwing it in so we have a flexible API to pull OSCAP results down with, and then again helping store these results and under one roof is really just that's a big plus for both security and developers alike, and it makes it a lot easier to solicit feedback and um, get remediation done a lot quicker. Let's see. I think that's it in terms of demo. We'll go back to the webinar very quickly. Okay, so just STIGs are important. They're complex. They do apply for containers. There's definitely some checks in there that do apply for containers that you should be running against. Again, it's still in development for us on, okay, how many of these can we take and apply during your build time, right? So how many of these can you actually take care of during the build, and then eventually, hopefully, we get to the point with Anchore we can go ahead and check against that. OSCAP is great. As we saw today, we love it. It's a really good tool to embed and use, and it has a great resource library in terms of STIG profiles that you can use for different applications. But again, it is siloed out, so you're always going to have to develop a separate step for that. Whereas with Anchore, you could kind of have that all wrapped together in one kind of CLI tool, which is really nice. Collaboration is required if we want to be successful. This is no different than anything else you've heard from any kind of DevSecOps briefing, right? You cannot do that without collaboration across all those teams. And STIGs is no different. So in order to accomplish that goal, it's definitely going to require a culture of collaboration. And then lastly, just that Anchore really focused on here in our next release, which goes GA very shortly, probably within the next week, which is we embed this STIG checking into an existing container security process to make this a lot easier for teams, so they don't have to go pick up another tool, and we provide that nice wrapper with REM to make it simplistic for organizations. All right.
All right, thank you, Hayden. So we've arrived at the question and answer portion of the webinar. So feel free to go to that question panel and enter any questions that you may have, but I've got a few here to get started with. So Hayden, you mentioned, or in the survey, we saw that a lot of people said that it's difficult for them to understand which STIGs are relevant for containers. Like, how do people go about dealing with the situation of not knowing which STIGs should apply?
Yeah, well, I think it's all based on like what applications you're using, right? So you have to first, take a look at that. There are some generic STIGs that are out there that you could take a look at, such as the application security STIG. That's a really good one to just get started with as a baseline. They have some standard profiles that you could use as well to layer on top of, application specific, STIGs that you should be doing.
Okay. And then if you end up running STIG checks that maybe aren't applicable in a certain situation, what and then what should they expect?
Yeah, so OSCAP does a pretty decent job at that, at returning, not applicable results. So they're pretty good at being able to filter out, this was not applicable, or they couldn't test it, or it, if it's a fail or pass, they're pretty good about that. It's certainly, there's certainly going to be a few that slip through the cracks. I think I'd be lying if I said there wasn't, but the OSCAP does a pretty good job at labeling what isn't applicable or what they couldn't check.
Okay, perfect. And then you mentioned earlier that this idea that traditionally STIG checks have happened in production, essentially, or runtime, like once production or maybe staging, I guess. What is, you mentioned shift left, about possibly shifting left, and it's best practice to check earlier. So what's really best practice there?
Yeah, so I think best practice is to try, and this came up in a lot of conversations we had with the Fed, which is we want to move all the, like, if we could, right, we would move every STIG check possible, into the kind of left and build phase. It's simply the way the STIG is designed, though, is that sometimes the application has to be, or actually often, the application has to be running, right? Because that's when certain, settings are made on certain files or certain directories. And that's when it has to go back and apply that STIG check again. What's important to understand with Anchore is that we're actively involved in solving that problem, right? That's what we're researching and trying to develop a solution for. And we've been tasked by the DoD with that solution, with that kind of research request, which is how can we move a lot of these STIG checks to the left so that the build and developers can bake those in early on, and that way you have fewer of these issues popping up in your kind of production or runtime environment. So that's kind of the core essence of the STIG. Is like, you really should be doing this in build, and often, like, a lot of teams are really good at that. Typically they'll build gold images, or they'll build either a virtual machines or containers or both, and then later on they find out they missed a couple settings or configurations in the STIG that security finds later on. So I think there's constantly, like, for the foreseeable future, there's constantly going to be a feedback loop that is necessary, and that's why on the last slide we need collaboration. Without it, you're gonna suffer, right? But we can do things like having flexible APIs like we saw today is going to make that process a lot simpler, because when you talk about baking this out at scale, and using a tool that has a flexible API to just go out and have it in an automated fashion, get you the results you need, and provide that to two stakeholders at once, is going to be really powerful, I think. Whereas before, typically it'd be the security office goes and does some scanning, and then they come back with a report and send you an email about it, and then you go through a 15-day email exchange with them all about one configuration setting before any work gets done. So I think we're doing a lot to address that issue and make it easier on all parties there.
So look for new advancements in the future, it sounds like.
Yeah,
all right, so
yeah.
we had another question come in. Does the tool leverage any other secure configuration benchmarks besides STIGs, such as CIS benchmarks?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I have been so far down the STIG rabbit hole. Our goal here, though, I would definitely answer with this, since I can't answer 100% on the CIS, but
I know the answer to that, which is that we do not using the REM tool, but we do support CIS benchmarks and have policy packs for that out of the box.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going. But I think a core thing to understand with OSCAP, and REM and our relationship is that when you take a look at REM, it's actually a framework, right? So we're looking at building out how to bake out, other solutions and how to incorporate other solutions, not just OSCAP. So if you want to use a different solution, to perform STIG checks other than OSCAP, you could certainly, do that down the line. So that's kind of our when we ventured off into this endeavor of, hey, let's solve how to make this a little bit easier for cloud native kind of shops out there in the public sector. That's what we were thinking about, is having more of a pluggable solution but yeah, I would definitely point them to the CIS policy packs, right? So, we definitely have policy packs that are available out of the box. And actually for CIS, you can, the CIS stuff is actually a lot easier to map to a container than a STIG, I think. A lot less checks for sure. But yeah, I would, definitely leverage those because those directly map back not only to CIS, but also to all the relevant NIST 853, NIST 800, 190 core kind of baselines that have been put out to help secure, not only containers, but information systems at large.
So I've got a couple of other more detailed questions. So one person's asking that they've seen mention of Kubernetes support, which I think they mean the tool working with Kubernetes. But what about integration with Docker EE, which I think is Docker Enterprise Edition, or Mirantis, which is now part of
so that's funny because in the I wasn't sure if someone caught it in the values file I shared, but you can run this on like the Kai like automated inventory tool that can run on a Docker kind of deployment. So if you are deploying over Docker, say you're using Docker Compose or something like that, you can certainly stand up Kai and have it kind of look at all those containers. I think you just specify that you're using Docker Compose rather than Kubernetes. So it's not like searching for a Kubernetes config file to kind of authenticate to a cluster. So
that's a yes for the person that asked that question. And then here's another question. Is it safe to assume I think this is supposed to be rel UBIs, that when a configuration file doesn't exist, that the functionality is not used, such as pwquality.conf or sys-auth-ac?
Yeah, can you repeat that? That was a
beefy it's a pretty detailed question.
It was beefy. It was a lot of like, so a UBA image and saying like if the
configuration file doesn't exist,
right,
the functionality is not used.
Yeah, so I'm not too sure on that. I'm not sure. I'm not too sure on that. I would have to go back and kind of get into the weeds on that. But they're pretty good at returning, a result for every kind of check that's out there, right? So they're pretty good about, returning something. It's not just gonna report back blank. It will either say, this is inapplicable, which will say pretty much that's where I think it would land, versus like, this is a false, like it would register like a false or a fail. Like I don't think it would register as a fail. I think it'd be probably in that not applicable box.
Okay, perfect. All right, I think that covers our questions. So thank you today, Hayden, for telling us all about STIGs, everything we need to know. And thanks everybody for joining, and hope to see you on a future webinar.